A shy person who is afraid of the attention of others is not free of ego, but has an ambivalent ego that both wants and fears attention from others. The fear is that the attention may take the form of disapproval or criticism, that is to say, something that diminishes the sense of self rather than enhances it. So the shy person's fear of attention is greater than his or her need of attention. Shyness often goes with a self-concept that is predominantly negative, the belief of being inadequate. So that was definitely an accurate description of my ego. I definitely had an inferior ego that felt inadequate and was very shy. And so I actually made the mistake of thinking that I didn't have an ego before, because I thought that it meant that it was just only someone who was, full of themselves or whatever. And I thought because I didn't see myself that way that I didn't have an ego. But according to Eckhart's ego, I definitely have one. And it was definitely a very strong one at that too. And, Eckhart talks about how the ego is conditioned by the past, and your childhood is definitely a big part of that past, right? And so I grew up with an emotionally neglectful mom, and that kind of, gave me a lot of toxic shame. I basically dealt with and struggled with feelings of, unworthiness, feeling unlovable, feeling rejected. I basically, felt my existence was an inconvenience. And so there were many ways that I was trying to cope with it growing up. I basically, tried on these survival mechanisms, basically around being invisible to stay safe. And so one of the ways I would do that is by, trying to put on different masks or be a chameleon wherever I was. And so I would always try to hide myself in those in social settings, because I was so afraid of what people thought, and I was afraid of any judgment, of any negative kind of responses from other people. And so it made me really hypervigilant and really socially anxious. And so it wasn't until I got into an unhealthy, dysfunctional relationship that I basically got into my existential crisis mode. I came to this big realization that even being in a romantic relationship couldn't save me from the pain of being alive, of basically existing. My life felt so, I was pretty depressed, I guess you could say, as a child, and I tried to repress it as much as I could, and it just never took away the sadness. And so I thought as I got older that I was always looking for other ways outside of myself to make me happy, but I could never find anything that could do that, not even a romantic relationship. And so when I got into that unhealthy relationship and it had ended, I was just so distraught. I was, basically, like I said, going through my existential crisis. And I was so desperate though. I remember I was considering, buying Eckhart Tolle's New Earth, and I was even kind of second guessing myself and doubting myself. That book had just come out and everyone was talking about it, and I was, I felt like I wanted to give it a shot. Why not, right? But even my own ego at the time was really resistant to that idea, because I guess I didn't want to be that cliche of that eat, pray, love cliche where, I had a bad breakup and then I get into spirituality. I was just resisting that so much because my ego didn't want me to, right? Like my ego almost got in the way of my own personal growth. And I basically at that time in my life had this too cool mask going on. I felt like I was too cool for spirituality, too cool for this and that. And so I felt like, I just didn't want to be that cliche of having a bad breakup and then going on a spiritual awakening journey. But that's ultimately what happened, and I am so grateful for that though, and I'm so grateful that I didn't allow my ego to win, because going through this journey and kind of popping out on the other side of just healing and the growth that I've done throughout the years has really paid off and is really worth doing it, no matter how much my ego at the time hated it and didn't want to look like that type of cliche. It really doesn't matter though. who I am now is completely different from who I was before. And I am more at peace, and I am much more happy than I used to be. So it really, if I had listened to my ego, it would have led me down even further of a unhappy, kind of depressed state. So I think one of the things that really helped me with my personal growth was just basically asking myself, was it worth hanging on to this idea that I was too cool for a spiritual journey, too cool for spiritual growth? That, was it worth being miserable still? Was it worth being depressed still? Or was it worth just trying something new, trying something different, and seeing, and what if it does work out, right? Like, what if I can actually get to the other side and more positive than negative comes out of it? And so I feel like I was only really able to get to that point because I was willing to kind of just be honest with myself, to kind of tell myself the truth of what was I really hanging on to and what was I kind of letting go of, like, was I willing to let go of this whole belief and idea that it wasn't cool to go on a spiritual journey, and it wasn't cool to, go on this personal growth journey just because of what other people might think. Like, it obviously wasn't going to be worth it if I chose that path, right? And so I think what's really important, and has been for me so far on this journey, is being able to have the courage to tell myself the truth about things. I think that there are so many parts of myself that I denied, that I repressed and suppressed, that I wasn't really willing to look at. But as long as I had the courage and willingness to tell myself the truth, over time, and just practice building the strength to do that, it has helped me so much, because I came to realize that being in denial, being, self-deceptive is really just such a blockage to my growth. And so I felt like, I had to learn to tell myself the truth, even if it felt like, it triggered a lot of shame and triggered a lot of guilt in me. But, I think the distinction was telling myself the truth isn't the same as doing it. I could just tell myself the truth of how I felt, of how I thought about things, and I can examine it after. No action needs to be taken. Nothing needs to go on from there. Like, yes, I can say something really, let's say, evil to myself that I had to admit about how I felt about something. But doesn't mean that that's true. Doesn't mean that, that I have to do anything about it. It just, as long as I'm willing to have the courage to tell myself how I really felt or what I really thought about something, it can really make the difference, because then it just brings it out to my awareness. I don't have to keep hiding it. I don't have to pretend that it's not there and be in denial of it. So I think it's really important to have the courage to tell yourself the truth, no matter how challenging it is, no matter how evil it might sound, because if we keep being in denial about it or keep deceiving ourselves about it, we'll never actually deal with it, right? And just because you tell the truth about something to yourself doesn't mean that you actually have to do anything about it, doesn't mean you have to act upon it or anything like that. I find that oftentimes when I tell myself the truth about something, about how I really feel or what I really think, even if it just seems so evil, so mean, or whatever, oftentimes the energy behind it just dissipates, and I don't feel like I have that opinion or thought anymore. I think that that's just part of looking at something and bringing the unconscious to the conscious arena. And I think that by doing that, it definitely helps to alleviate any repression we have about it and stuff. And so when I was able to kind of look at my thoughts and my opinions and everything honestly and not be in denial of it, I think that really did help me kind of achieve more freedom, in the sense that I was able to disidentify with it rather than just keep suppressing it and pretend that it's not there. And I think that that's a really important part of like this personal growth journey, is that we have the courage to tell ourselves the truth. And sometimes it can be the thing that we really needed to tell ourselves to basically create change, And like I said, if it's something that, you feel guilty or ashamed about, it's not like you have to act upon every single truth that you tell yourself. It's just doing that work of telling yourself the truth and having the courage to is just an act of basically bringing awareness to your thoughts, to your emotions, and all that stuff. And it doesn't mean that it's true, you have to do anything about it. It just means that we're practicing awareness. And I think that the safest way to do it is to tell yourself the truth. You don't have to tell someone else. You don't have to confide in anyone else. I think the act of telling yourself the truth just helps bring things up from the unconscious to the conscious. And so when we're aware of it, we can let it go and disidentify with it. And I think that's, just part of the journey. That's part of the practice to become more aware and to be more conscious of things, even our thoughts and our emotions. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.